Well, good afternoon, everybody. Or is it still morning? I don't know. So, my name is Chris Harris. I am the technical director for Hortonworks here in EMEA. Basically, I founded the technology team here. So I'm happily talk over the use cases that we're seeing in the field, but I can also take any other questions that you might have. The purpose of this talk really is to give you a little bit of an overview of the sorts of use cases that we're seeing out there in the industry. So what we're seeing is almost the fact that everybody that at least I speak to say they want to look at using Hadoop and big data in some particular way. And they've almost decided on that. The question they haven't decided on is, how do I do it, right? And where do I start? So what this talk is going to give you a little bit on is the sorts of journeys that we're seeing and the use cases that people are doing along that journey. So I'll try to keep it reasonably short, but if you do have questions, feel free to just shout out. So, as I say, where do we start, right? You hear a lot of people come to me and say, I've got this great vision. And I've heard there's people that you work with that have got tens of thousands of servers. We saw, people talk about Yahoo, who have got 40,000 machines running Hadoop. And you're thinking, well, I'm not going to start there, right? So then the question becomes, well, why are we doing this? So what typically people are saying is they want to transform their organization. They want to transform the way in which they see data across their entire organization, and what they want to do is make decisions off data, right? So they're going to look at not only transactional data, they're going to start looking at the interactional data, how customers are interacting with them if they're a retailer, what people are doing in terms of interactions regarding fraud detection. So I might be looking at the ability to track how people are going across all my channels, and if there's an odd behavior, that might be fraud. Or if I'm a healthcare person, I might be trying to look at all the sensors across all of my medical rooms to track patterns or medical records. So there's hundreds and thousands of use cases that you could do. And I like the expression that somebody gave me the other day is, you could actually, with Hadoop, get to the point where it's almost death by use cases, right? Because I can think of so many, I just don't know where to start. So my advice to people typically is, it's great to have a vision and a strategy. Absolutely. We should have that in place because we need to know where we're going. But the question then becomes, how do you get there? So most people start small. How many of you are using Hadoop? Okay. A few. So most of you people will be starting reasonably small. So you might have maybe 12 machines in a Hadoop cluster. You might have 20. You might have got to 100, right? But you're looking at a small cluster that you can build upon. Some people might be saying, I've only got one machine, right? So you're looking at a single use case that you can build upon that drives value. And obviously, there's two major points in which people are going to be looking at. They summarize down to, am I trying to save cost? Or am I trying to do a net new analytical workload? Am I trying to look for new patterns in the data that I may not have been able to see before? Or am I trying to take cost out of my infrastructure? It's kind of where people start. So how do we get started? The biggest things that I see across the industry, and I'm not trying to sell you anything, is simply the fact that there isn't enough skills out there in understanding how Hadoop works. So how do we start? Where do we start? Here we go. So Now, you can start by really small, really, really small, right? You could start and say, I just download, this is free, it's not, I'm trying to sell you anything. It's a virtual machine that runs on your laptop. And it's tutorials, right? I'm trying to understand what this thing is about. And then you could go from there, and you could build your little cluster, your POC cluster, whatever it is, to try out the technology. Again, the software is free, so it's not a case of buying it. You could just try it at low cost. If you are saying, well, I don't have my own inside infrastructure, because why would I invest in large set of infrastructure if I don't know what the value is yet? Then you could obviously try in the cloud, and there's a way of doing that, right? So you could either take the Hortonworks data platform and launch it into the cloud, be that on Microsoft, be that on Azure, on Amazon, or whatever cloud provider you're using, or Microsoft provide you HD Insight as a service. You click a button and you're good to go. So, okay, so I've got a cluster. Now, where do I learn? What do I do with it? Well, you could start off with being able to say, if I'm come from an operational background, right? So these are people who know how to stand up machines and how to do operations, how to do production environment. There's ability for you to really look at a set of material that we provide out for that. If I'm more of an analytical guy, so when I talk about clusters to the operational people think I'm talking about machines. If I talk about clustering from analytics, they think I'm talking about graphs and visualizations, right? So the terminology is different. So there's a way of being able to understand how Hadoop works in that type of workload. And obviously, if you're a developer, you're looking at building applications on Hadoop, right? So you'll be coming from this at a different angle, depending on your background. But what the purpose of them 3 slides was to say, you shouldn't be thinking, if I want to go on my Hadoop journey, let's go and buy 500 machines, and let's start there, right? Let's start small and just learn what it's about. But the question then becomes, how do we move beyond that point? Right? Because I can go to a trade show, I can go to an event, go to a website, I can download stuff, I go to YouTube, I can learn, right? That's not a problem. But where do I begin? So the first use case is typically this. It's typically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to save cost. So why is this the first use case? Anybody know? Well, the concept is, if I can save cost from my existing IT infrastructure, I can use that cost saving and I can fund my future analytical projects with it. So I can say, if I'm looking for new trends and new data and new patterns in that data to do analytics, clearly that's an investment I need to make, and I don't know what the return is yet, because I have to do all the analytics to find my return. So if I do a cost optimization, first of all, which is a fairly simplistic way to get started, I could use that cost saving and fund the next project. Simple mathematics does that, right? So what is a cost saving project? Typically, this is an IT-driven project. This is the ability for you to say, I may have an existing data warehouse. So I've got a data warehouse, be that Teradata, Microsoft PDW, whatever, SQL Server, whatever it is, right? I have got a data warehouse. And it is probably fairly large and expensive, right? Lots of data in here, very transactional data, rows and columns of data in my data warehouse. The data warehouse has great value. Do not think that by day one you're going to replace the data warehouse with Hadoop. It's not really what you're going to do. But you're going to optimize the data warehouse. You're going to say, let's have a look at the storage capacity that's on the data warehouse today. Is it at maximum capacity? What processing is the data warehouse doing? Because it might be doing transformation. It might be trying to take some of the data that you're putting in the data warehouse, make it into something that's useful, and expose it to the business. Very traditional data warehousing technology. So or you might have new data sources, right, that you want to bring in. These are semi-structured data, or whatever it is. So if you look at a data warehouse today, then typically you can see that from a data storage perspective, roughly 70% of the EDW is full of data. Now, not all of that is typically what the user is interacting with. He'll be interacting with a small part of that data because there's lots of archival data on there. Because 55% of the data warehouse will be doing transformation. It will be doing lots of calculations and making that data into something that's useful. It's called ETL. So if you look at that, 70% of my data is unused. 30% of the data is something in which the users are interacting with. So what can I do? Well, what I can do is I could start to what we call offload some of the archival data. The data that people aren't using, that's 70% of that data that isn't used, and have the data warehouse connect to Hadoop. So if somebody says, I want to get hold of the archival data, the data warehouse can access it. But from a cost-saving perspective, it's cheaper to store the data in Hadoop than it is a data warehouse. So I've offloaded the cost from the data warehouse. And then I can start doing the processing of that data in Hadoop itself. Because Hadoop is not just a storage engine, it's also a processing platform. Right? So what I can do is I can land the data, I can transform it into something that's useful in Hadoop, and then feed the data warehouse with the 30% of the data that people are actually using. And have an architecture whereby the end user never sees a change. So what I've done there is I've reduced a huge amount of cost because my data warehouse is pretty expensive. To give you an illustration of what I'm talking about here. So this is from one of my customers in a 1 year. If you look at archival data, so this is the data that the 70% of the data that wasn't being used, they moved it to Hadoop. And so you obviously got a reduced capacity of that data warehouse. And then what you've got is obviously the annual cost of that data warehouse reducing because you're not using it so much. So you see a cost save there. So then you've got also the offloading data. So this is the transformation of the data, right? So making the data into something that's useful that I'm going to then feed to the data warehouse. I've moved all that processing off the data warehouse. That basically allows me to obviously save cost there because I'm not utilizing the data warehouse for that. So now what I've got in this, that's a daisy. I was going to use the pointer. Now what I've got is a bunch of cash, right? From a finance perspective, I've got this money now, right? So I've saved all this money. So what I can do is I use this money to fund my new analytical use case because that's exploration. That's looking for new trends. And hopefully it's the big revenue booster, right? But this is just a cost-saving thing. This is how people like TrueCar did this, right? They took their data warehouse and managed to take their storage cost down by taking the archival data off down to basically 23 cents per gigabyte, right? It's a huge cost saving from the data warehouse. And this is a story everywhere. Use the cost saving to fund the next project. There's also another reason why people do this, it's not on the slide, is these Hadoop clusters can get pretty big pretty fast because you're adding more use cases. That's space in the data warehouse. That's physical space that I got to put this thing. So if I can reduce cost in my other infrastructure, what I can do is I can use that space to host Hadoop. So it's a simple IT problem. So now I've saved some cost in data warehousing. What do I do next? It's a fundamental journey, right? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take people from that potential, which was download the sandbox, understand Hadoop, go on some training, educational, what is the value to Hadoop, doing some projects in IT to save some money, cost saving, and then I want to build what's known as a data lake. The data lake is the idea that I want to have a single Hadoop cluster in the data center, right? One per major data center, not one per line of business. What I want to do is I want to be able to take all the lines of business's data and copy it into one place so I can do deep analytical trend analysis across my lines of business and break down the silos that are there. And if I can do that, then fundamentally I can start seeing across the lines of business, and I can start using data in stage 4 in the journey, which is to become truly data-driven, which is everything I'm doing is based upon that data. And you'll see people in stage 4 talk about data as capital. They'll say, I've got a chief data officer, right, who sits on my board, right? Because what he's doing is using data across the entire organization to do that. So when you get to this stage, you start to think differently about how you run your organization. You start to think of, how do I break down the silos? Many of the big finance companies that I work with, or the big telcos, or the big healthcare organizations, have got different lines of business, and even from an IT perspective, they have data that's only in a particular line of business, which makes analytics across that organization almost impossible. So I'm not saying we need to get rid of the lines of business. That's a crazy idea. What I'm saying is what I should be able to do is provide a platform so I can copy the data across the lines of business into a single place and do analytics across my entire organization. That's what I'm trying to do here, right? So if I'm going to do that, clearly there's challenges. I've got lines of business to deal with. I've got lots of data, right? And so the volume of data is obviously from each line of business that they might have today. But it's also the fact that if you see in the bottom of this slide, you see other types of data coming in. So it's not just about what did I buy, right? Because if you think of what did I buy, which is what a data warehouse has. A data warehouse has transactional data about financially what did I buy from the store, if you're a retailer, that is. Now, what it doesn't tell you is why did I buy? What was my path to purchase? It doesn't tell me that. It just tells me that there are 500 sales of laptops from the store today. How I got there, I don't know. So the interactions that I did with that organization, did I start on the website? Did I go to the mobile channel? Did I buy a product and never actually use it? Did I phone the customer and customer services and complain? So I have interactions pre-purchase. I have interactions post-purchase. So you'll start to see people talk about the need for all this interactional data and all this device data, right? So now people talk about the Internet of Things or the Internet of anything, right? So now the volume of data, if I'm going to take it from a light bulb, and there's a lot of light bulbs in here, right, that's a lot of data, right? Or if I'm going to take it every single click that somebody does, that's again a lot of data. So these volume and the sources of data, because it's machine-generated data, because it's a click, it's from a light bulb, it's from the, I'm going to say the chair, but maybe not the chair. But it is from all of these devices that are out there that are generating data, which basically means it's not in rows and columns. So I've got different structures of data to deal with. Many organizations, when think, where can I store this? I've got my data warehouse, I've got my MPP that is hopefully now optimized because I've done some cost saving, but where can I put all of this data? Clearly my answer is going to be in Hadoop. So there's two real states here. that you see people do. The first one is, well, what I want to be able to do is I want to do future state analytics. Right? So what I'm doing here is I'm going to capture large volumes of data, and I'm going to do basically analytics, right? So all these lines of business are going to come to me, put all the data into the lake, and I'm going to have a team of analytical people who are going to mine that for new trends and new products. Now, that if you think of that top line there, what I've just said is I'm taking all the lines of business data, putting it in one place. Clearly, that's not live data. It doesn't tell me what did Chris just click on. It tells me across all the organizations, let's do analytics. So I'm looking at the data, historical data, to find future trends. That's what the top one is saying to you, right? So future state analytics. So I'm going to combine all these large volumes of data sets together to do that. The bottom one is to say, what's happening right now? I want to make a decision based upon the interactions that I'm seeing right this moment. How many of you use Spotify? Somebody must. There's a few of you. All right. Well, if those of you who aren't familiar with it, it is a very, I shouldn't say simplistic, but it's a very, it's a streaming service that's very easy to use, right? So the idea is that I can go on there and I can listen to my music. Now, we've all got different trends and different flavors of music that we like. Kind of music is very personal to people. So what you want to be able to do is make it very interactive. You want to have your music platform be very personal to you. So when I'm listening to something, I want to recommend the next song to you that you're going to be interested in, right? If I recommend something that's completely in a different genre, you're probably going to say, I don't like the next thing, and you start to become unhappy with the service, and you stop using it. So you want to start doing recommendations in the use case of real-time data. Now, you will look at the real-time stream, understand what's happening right now, and use the data you've already stored to make recommendations. So you might say, based upon this, where he is on the website, and his historical profile, then I'm going to recommend this. Right? So you see Amazon, other people bought this sort of thing, right? It's a very classic example of the same behavior. Netflix do it with, when you click around the screen, they recommend videos to you, right? But what they're doing is they're doing of real-time interactions. But now, if you imagine I've got a single platform, right, that I started very small with, I did some cost saving, I then grew it to bring all the lines of business together, and then I can do real-time analysis. So there's a lot of people got to this stage, right? So as I say here, what you can do is typically will fall into 3 major categories. So you've got like a maintenance category, right? So some people have done this to say, well, if I'm a manufacturer, for example, and my machine breaks, then I can't manufacture anything. I can't build anything. I can't produce anything, right? So I don't want that. That's a bad idea, right? We don't want anything to break. Or even if I'm a high street retailer for food, fast food restaurant, right? I don't know, you think of the fast food restaurants of your choice, or a restaurant of your choice. It doesn't even need to be fast food, a restaurant of your choice. And the refrigerator breaks. That's not good, right? All that food is now destroyed. So very simple use case that you could think of that affects that restaurant. So what I want to be able to do is I want to predict when that's going to happen. So if I see certain behavior in that device, then what I can do is I can say, well, let's call the engineer out before it breaks. It's very simple. Yeah. It sounds a very easy thing to do, but you need all the data from that device, that refrigerator, to be able to do that. So that's predictive maintenance, right? Obviously, you can talk about resource optimization. I'll give you one use case of this. Telcos do this. Telecommunication providers do this. Why do they do this? Let's just think of, if I'm a big telecom provider, right? I have all of you people out there using my service, and if I look at many of these telcos, it's quite easy now for you to switch provider. Right? You might say, my contract is running out, I'm going to move to another provider. It's called churn. So I want to make sure I'm giving you a good service. Okay. But obviously, to make that service better, I'm going to invest in things like big infrastructure to put a big transmitter somewhere, right? So that you get a great service for your telephone. That costs money, right? So where do I put it? That's an interesting question. Where do I put it? Well, I can put it based upon the data that I have, right? So I have the ability to say, if I track where where the telephones are, right, or where the dropped calls are coming from, so when your phone cuts out, that's another reason to say, well, if, I don't know, 20%, and it's a huge number, it wouldn't be this high, but if a percentage of the people that are in this area always getting dropped calls, then maybe I'd invest here, right? If, for example, I'm not going to invest over here because it doesn't affect any of my customers. Then you've got, obviously, behavioral insight. So this is where you see insurance companies doing this sort of behavior, where you can start to see things like, how do I drive, right? So insurance companies now aren't just saying to you, well, I want to be able to give you insurance policy. You click on their website, and whoever's the lowest price wins. Hey! Right? That's not a good business model for anybody to be in. So what you want to be able to do is, if I could understand how people drive, I might give people different discounts. Well, this is a good idea. So what you do is, you see Progressive Insurance, for example, do this. They give you devices, and lots of them do this. Now, they give you devices, plug them in your car, you drive along, and it basically looks at your driving pattern and says, based upon that, I think we can adjust your insurance policy hopefully down and not up, right? So some people come to me and go, I don't want to do that because I could put my insurance up. But what I'm doing is that I'm looking at behavior to do that, risk profiling. But what I've just said, just to sum it up, it sounds like a big journey, right? It sounds like I'm going to get rid of everything in my data center and start all over again. That's not what I'm saying, because you can reuse your existing tooling. Hadoop is a platform to store all this data, process this data, being able to really move you along that journey to become a data-driven organization in such a way that you could reuse your existing analytical tooling. So you could, reuse SAS and run SAS on Hadoop, or you could take, if you wanted to, depending on your organization, you could just take Excel and stick that on Hadoop, right? Sure, you could. You might be having a data warehouse. As I said, we're not replacing the data warehouse, we're optimizing the data warehouse. So you want to integrate them. So you want to integrate Teradata or SQL Server or Vertica or the rest of the data warehouses into Hadoop. So what we're looking at saying is, yes, you would probably, you want to understand how Hadoop works. Yeah, I'm done. But what you want to be able to say is, I need some skills there, but I can reuse the skills I already have. With that, I am done. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you.